All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. Excited to have you
Awesome.
here with us today. So, if you could let us know in the chat, I would love to know where everybody's from and what kind of work you do. I know we had lots of different missions here represented. So, maybe quickly put in the chat what mission you represent, and we'll get started here in a few minutes. Oh, somebody from Canada. All right.
Nice. Okay. Southern California. Love the weather there.
All right. World Relief. Good Shepherd. Good
Oop,
job.
Toronto,
Another
my old
Texas
neighbor.
person there for you, Charles.
Yeah, love it.
Dallas, a lot of Texas is represented here.
A lot of Canada too. Very nice.
Oh, somebody from Orlando.
My hometown in Rochester, New York. I love that too.
Yeah. I was just at AFP this past week, and there was a lot of folks from Canada there. It was really nice
Okay.
to see them.
I love the international perspective.
Yep. Another person from Vancouver, and we have one of our team located in Canada. All right. Good deal. Southwest Florida. Welcome, Terry.
Okay. Oh, I love Vancouver. Beautiful, beautiful area.
Oh, we've got a domestic violence shelter.
Very nice. Welcome.
Yeah. Spent a
Oh,
lot of
we have
time in
Mexico.
Monterrey,
Okay.
Mexico. All right. All right, Beth. Well, welcome, Beth. Great. We've got a really great group of folks here. I hope everybody is experiencing some wonderful weather wherever you happen to be. It happens to be muggy and hot here in Florida.
To my fellow New Yorkers, I hope it stops snowing.
Oh, we've got another domestic violence shelter in California.
Excellent.
Oh, and women in tech communications and technology. One of our former clients is World Pulse. They're doing a lot of great stuff in that space.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, wonderful. All right.
Canada is
Autumn.
representing today. I love it.
Yeah, domestic violence shelter and services in Calgary. Okay. Well, I'm going to hop in and just go ahead and introduce myself and Charles so we can get going here. Continue to go ahead and put your missions and where you're from in the chat. I'm really excited that you have all joined us today because this is a hot topic. So, my name is Carol Wick, and I am the president of Sharity. We are an international consulting firm, and we've worked so far in 34 different countries around the globe. Our team is spread all over the United States and the world. We work with organizations that are looking to grow sustainable revenue. So, we build operating systems. We're not a traditional fundraising firm. We build the systems that you need to have in place and to be strong and sustainable. And one of the most important of those is financials. So have with us today Charles William, who's one of our experts, and I'm going to let him tell a little bit about himself.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me, Carol. I'm honored to be here. So a little bit about me. I'm a licensed CPA of almost 20 years now. I started my career in public accounting, auditing publicly traded manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies, specifically in aerospace and defense and startup pharmaceuticals. In my off season, I used to focus a lot on nonprofits, and that's what really drove my drive to be here to help nonprofit organizations. Because what I've seen over my career, generally speaking, is we have a lot of great people, a lot of great heart and great direction, but the finance aspect tends to fall a little bit to the wayside. And I love to bring my for-profit experience over to the nonprofit world to help them continually be successful and serve the communities that they target.
It's great. And a little bit about just kind of framing for today. So, Charity works on a five-factor principle. And in fact, I have a book coming out next week. It's really a textbook for nonprofits on how to scale internally. And the five factors is really based on what major donors look for before they write large checks to your institution. And we talk a lot. In fact, I was just at AFP International this past week speaking, and there was lots of opportunities for people to learn different techniques and tools and strategies. But what we find too often is that nonprofits don't have an operating system that integrates all of the elements so that they're working together. And the five elements that major donors are looking for are they're looking for, do you have a business plan? Do you have a business plan that makes sense and that you're actually implementing in your day-to-day work? Do you know how much it will cost to implement that business plan? And that's part of what we're going to be talking about today. And what I stressed this week at AFP was if you're a fundraiser or you try to fundraise, which most of us do in the nonprofit sector, if you don't know how much you're raising money, how much that plan is going to cost to execute, and you can't articulate that, then donors are going to have a hard time writing a check and understanding the execution portion of the plan, even if it happens to be in writing. The other thing that they want to know is what's going to happen as a result of you executing on that plan. What are your outcomes? And not your outputs, but your outcomes. They want to know, do you have the team to pull this off? Both your operational team, your board, as well as your fundraisers who are going to go out and do your revenue driving. And then the last thing we want to know is what is your revenue strategy? Do you have the donors, the earned revenue, the program fees, the government support to be able to move your mission forward in a sustainable way? So we're going to be focusing today on the budget and the sustainability piece of this because this is a time right now where a lot of organizations are really struggling with what am I going to do next? We have funders that are delayed. Maybe they're moving out of the space that we're in. I know for those of you here in the US and internationally, there used to be some fairly consistent government funding that we could rely on. And that is no longer consistent. I know there's a lot of you in the violence against women space. Your grants are now delayed almost 6 months. That sort of uncertainty with something that maybe you had 60, 70% of your funding based on really creates a lot of challenges. And if we don't know a lot about our financials and we aren't really thinking through those projections, it can really be a difficult time to navigate. So we're going to be talking a lot about that. As we go through today, I want to encourage you to put any questions that you have in the chat. We will be having a Q&A at the end, but we do want to make sure that we're hitting on any questions or concerns that you have as we do go through today, our discussion about budgeting and the, the elements that are so critically important in this day and age. So Charles, to you, what is it that nonprofit leaders you think really struggle with in times of uncertainty when it comes to budgeting? Because I know that a lot of organizations, they set a budget, they put it into their financial systems, and then it kind of runs. Maybe they do it 2 to 3 months ahead of time, but it's a year-to-year process. So when you're in an uncertain time like now, like what kind of challenges are leaders facing?
Absolutely. The top ones I tend to see in my career are, like, as to your point, not doing it early enough. A good budget usually takes anywhere from 4 to 6 months. You want to start that towards the end of the summer if you're a December year end. That gives you time to work with your departmental leaders and really drive a budget that is reflective of your current operations as well as your goals. The other problem I tend to see here is a lack of analysis of your restricted funding as well. A lot of times the budget tends to focus specifically on unrestricted funding. However, nonprofits have both. We have restrictions on some of our funds, whereas we don't on others. And while those restricted funds, yes, they cannot be used widespread through the organization, they still have a financial impact that we need to consider. Lastly, the other piece that I tend to see is coming from the for-profit world, I call it overhead, but for nonprofits, I would refer to it as their management, general, and fundraising expenses. While these expenses are not necessarily directly associated with program delivery, they have a direct impact on the financial bottom line that they should be analyzing on a regular basis. You're still on mute, Carol.
Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. And one of the
No
things that we
problem.
talk to nonprofit executives about and financial leaders is that understanding the cost of doing business at this day and age is just so absolutely critical. And we're seeing a lot of our clients who have not drilled down and done that math. And they're offering something, let's just say a counseling service.
Mhm.
And they're getting a grant for that counseling service, but they really don't know what it costs for them to deliver that counseling service. So they're not leveraging their finances enough to be able to negotiate those contracts. I mean, as a
Yes.
for-profit, I would never take a contract where I was getting paid less than it cost me to do the job. But we expect nonprofits to do that all the time in the sector. So let's talk for a second about, the cost of doing business. And right now in this times of uncertainty, what are some of those gaps that you're seeing with nonprofits in terms of really understanding their finances, where maybe we would have been able to do it at a high level at one point in time, but now we're needing to drill down deeper?
Sure, absolutely. I see this every day. A lot of times when we are analyzing our financial performance, we're looking at just general bottom line. And nowadays, to your point, with the gaps in funding that we're seeing from cost of service versus what's actually being billed, we can't run a nonprofit from a long-term perspective with that type of analysis. What I generally recommend, and it always comes back to my manufacturing background because we focus on cost accounting so much, is I use healthcare as a great example. We used to analyze per person, per episode, per visit. So, regardless of the services that we would provide, because when you get down to that level of metric, you can truly identify every single type of service that you offer and the cost to deliver said services. Without that highly granular analysis that again is prevalent in the manufacturing industry, you can tend to make mistakes when analyzing your budget versus your financial performance.
Yeah. And I know, again, this week at AFP, as I was presenting, some folks were really struggling with, what does that look like in practice? How do I know whether or not I've actually drilled down to the level I need to drill down? What sorts of financials would I have if I really was doing the type of detailed analysis that's necessary in this day and age?
When you get down to that level of granularity, it opens up a world of information to upper management to drive the organization forward. You can start to look at what your fundraising gaps truly are rather than a general idea. It starts to take your performance to your program delivery and identify areas that you might be inefficient in. We might be, for example, again, from the healthcare side, we might be great at fixing nicks and cuts at a community health center, but we might be losing elsewhere, maybe on vaccinations or counseling. And when you start to break it out by service line like that, you'll truly start to identify how you can improve, save every dollar, and maximize what you're bringing in to continually deliver those services.
Yeah, and I'm curious in the chat, how many of you have actually broken your budgets out by program and by service,
Mhm.
and have that level of detail on for your organization. So I think sometimes, a lot of organizations, I've seen quite a few say they do. A lot of
Excellent.
organizations, that's amazing.
Very happy to
Um,
hear.
it's really great to see this. This is wonderful because it's so really difficult to make strategic decisions if you don't know if you have a grant that says that you're being paid and they're asking you for an output, which most grants do, are you really getting paid? And if not, what's that gap? Um, and I think the conversation that really arose, again, I was at the Association of Fundraising Professionals, is for your fundraisers, they have to know that number. And so, being able to use that information, um, and make those strategic decisions. The other thing, Charles, as we're starting to talk about budgeting and thinking through, like, as we start to move forward, one of the things that I always talk to groups about when we tie outcomes back to budget, how
Mhm.
much is it costing you to actually produce an outcome? And are we losing money? Are we making money? And if you have a program that produces an incredible output or an outcome, meaning, we provide this service and 95% of the people who receive the service graduate and end up in a permanent housing. We'll just use that as an example, but we lose money on that. You can
Mhm.
fundraise for that, but you really talk a little bit about the strategic decision making around that, and how should you be involving the board in those decisions?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to start, I always recommend involving the board in all significant decisions, especially program delivery and budgeting. But when we are digging down into looking at the costs to maximize these funding gaps and having programs that may deliver high outcomes versus a low profit, I always come back to the for-profit world here. You would not find a manufacturer creating products that they lose money on. Nonprofits should also not be doing the same thing. Again, we're here to serve communities, we're here to help. But if we can't generate a financial profit to continue delivering those services, we have a problem. And then that's when the greater reliance on your fundraising team comes in, because you need strong fundraisers to help close that gap. Or on a higher level, executive management should be working with the board to determine, is this a program we'd like to deliver?
Mhm. And I've had clients recently that have really taken a hard look at maybe the outcomes really weren't very strong for that program, and they started to sunset it. Um, I'm seeing some, talking about leadership, as you start to drill down to program level budgets, you need to make sure that your managers are managing their own budgets. And that's for some organizations is a huge leap from just the executive and the board level management to actually expecting operations folks to manage their budgets. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. The budget should never be held just between finance and the board of directors. To me, the budget is a major process that should absolutely be divided up against every operational leader within the organization, because those
Mhm.
operational leaders are the ones driving the ultimate outcomes. They should be responsible for, let's call it their silo within the budget, to maintain profitability and minimizing costs through that process. It's a shared experience, truthfully, from the bottom to the top, if you'd like it to be effective.
And how do you, because not a lot of operations people, they're social workers, or they're environment research scientists and things like that. How do we get people like that in a nonprofit to be able to embrace doing that?
Absolutely. You know, what I will say, it's meeting them at their level. And I don't mean that as an up or down perspective, but they don't necessarily have the deeper financial expertise that somebody like me or the finance director of a nonprofit would. It's meeting them to help them understand that the actions they take drive the dollars that we're reviewing, and working
Yeah.
together to understand those operational changes that can reflect in the financial statements as it's needed.
We've got some good questions in the chat, and that is around boards stuck in this mentality that we're a nonprofit, therefore we don't make a profit. And it drives me crazy. There's an old saying that's if that nonprofit is a tax status, not a goal.
Correct.
And I like to repeat that to boards over and over again. If we're trying to cover depreciation and have a decent reserve, cash reserve, and even investment reserve, you have to make a profit. And there's
Absolutely.
absolutely nothing wrong with actually getting more money for service than it costs you to execute on that service. It just means that you then have money to fund the other things. But how do you work with boards to help them start to shift that mindset? Because these 99% of the time, these are for-profit people that are stuck in this mindset. They also are stuck in that mindset that you should have like a 5% admin G&A.
You know, it's funny you should say that, because on the boards I've served on, you're right. Most of us do come from the for-profit area. And that's what I find so surprising, because truthfully, nonprofits, you should still be making money, but the only difference is you don't have shareholders to please, you have constituents to support. And that's just as that's honestly, that's more important, because you're delivering real services to people, animals, and others that need it. Um, Having been a board treasurer as well, working with bankers and other financial professionals, I find that I tend to be the squeaky wheel going, that's great that we've done some wonderful things, but we're losing money here. And we need to think longevity when we're losing money. If we're losing funding, we can't continue these programs that we love to support.
Yeah, absolutely. And really that's the bottom line. I know my perspective as a nonprofit CEO, which I did that for 30 years in some sort of management, that when I stopped begging for money and I'm starting saying, I can remember going up in front of a county government entity at one point and saying, your funding has been flat for 10 years and our demand for services has gone up exponentially. And they said, that's great. You're being much more efficient with the funds. I was like, that didn't work. That just backfired on me. So being able to sit back and say, hey, wait a minute, we really need to be looking at what this is costing us to do. And is this really, one, what has the best outcomes for people? Two, is how do I go back to the government and say, you know what, I'm not going to just keep telling you that you're getting more and more for the same amount of money just because we're providing those services. We're going to back this up and I'm going to tell you you're getting a third of what, because you're going to actually pay for the services. So that it also eased up my reporting. They didn't like it. But then I had to go back and say, but then the reality is you're paying for a third of the service, you're not paying for the full service. And having those conversations with your government contractors and program officers, rather than playing this game that somehow they're actually paying for a full cost of it, I think is really, really important when you're negotiating. Um, so yeah, I think that once someone's saying that they have to return any surplus that they have every single
Mhm.
year, um, with government money, you do have to often return that surplus, but with your fundraising, typically you can keep your fundraising, you're unrestricted. So you don't want to run a surplus on your government money, but you definitely want to then be able to, if you can get your government money to cover the actual expense, then you can use your fundraising as unrestricted to pay for other things like anticipated capital expenses and other things that might be coming up. Um, let's talk a little bit. I know I'm probably driving Peter, who's got the deck, crazy, and I don't know, Peter, you may want to go ahead and drop the deck. Let's talk a little bit about forecasting because this is not something that, as a nonprofit executive, I knew that I had to be very accurate when I was building a building, something like that. Um,
Absolutely.
but I will say that we're in the midst of helping, I don't know, five or six clients right now who are in 100 million plus campaigns that have stalled. And the reason that they've stalled is because they need more money than they thought they were going to need. And sometimes it's 30, 40, $50,000 or $50 million more.
Oof.
Um,
Yeah.
let's talk about forecasting, especially in this day and age, as things are all over the place with rising tariffs and oil and prices are just all over the place. How can a nonprofit accurately forecast all their budget out so that if I have a strategic plan, I'm actually forecasting and not having to go back to donors and say, sorry, I made a mistake. I'm going to need more money.
Absolutely. The biggest piece I would say here is nobody, first of all, nobody has a crystal ball. The best forecast is nothing more than an estimate. However, what makes this an effective tool is regular review and adjustment when circumstances change. For example, the OBBBA has changed tax advantages for donations, which has actually made it harder for individuals and corporations to give money and get their same tax benefit. On top of that, to your point, we have rising costs and also stagnating government funding. A constant review of the market conditions and a constant review of your budget against actual is how you stay nimble against something like this. Otherwise, the budget just becomes kind of one of those tools. You do it because you have to, and it collects dust on a shelf, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think when we work with organizations and after we feel like when you do a strategic plan, the budget is part of the strategic plan. They are
Yes.
not separate. And just for those of you on the call today, how we then move the strategic plan into a fundraising strategy, which they should all be intricately linked, is we add each one of the years of the strategic plan together. So you add year one, year two, year three, whatever that forecast is for each year. Those 3 years together are your comprehensive campaign. And if you have capital, you add that in there. Now, that may not be what you present externally, but again, I had a client the other day. I was meeting with their fundraising staff. They had a capital campaign budget. And I said, well, what do you need to raise over the next 24 months? And they mentioned the campaign budget. And I said, well, what about operating? And they were like, oh, well, that's another $10 million. And I said, so you don't have to raise 50 million, you have to raise 60 million. A whole different conversation, right? So it's really important that we're thinking comprehensively when we start talking about where we're going to be in 3 years, how much that's going to cost. Are we moving staff into market rate, um, healthcare costs, and anticipating all of those different things? When you start talking to major donors, they want to know. They want to know what is this going to cost to execute? And sometimes we find that boards panic a little bit when they see those numbers. What's the best way to ease a board into understanding a forecasted budget and that number may actually be a pretty large number that they have to lean into and fundraise for?
That's a great question. I always start anytime with a forecast or a budget. I start from the most conservative side because I want to anticipate losses that we might not think about, lower than anticipated revenue. I think somebody made a point as well. Some of our fundraising is uncertain whether or not we're going to get it the next year. So to me, the best way to get them on board is warn them of those things ahead of time, leverage them for their expertise and their connections, because part of your board's responsibility is also to assist in fundraising. And keep that communication repeatedly going. It'll get them more comfortable. It should, and you should always promote the opportunity to ask questions. This should never be a
Yeah,
conversation management tells the board what's going on. It should always be collaborative. And when you build that teamwork, that's how they become more comfortable and they're better able to respond to the situation going on for that particular nonprofit.
yeah. And you and I've talked, and you said, one of the things that's really critical, and I know it's sometimes hard, but having a CPA on your board is really important.
Absolutely. I fully support it, especially in the treasurer role. I've done it myself, and it's not just to toot my own horn, but because we come from that background of financial analysis, auditing, taxation, reviewing 990s, CPAs have that internal knowledge to be able to assist the board in understanding that financial information that they may not necessarily be exposed to on a regular basis in their own careers.
Yeah. So one of the questions is how do you build funding shortfalls and expected gaps into your forecasted budget? And I think that there's a couple questions similar to this. And I think this is something that a lot of organizations are facing right now where if you're in the US and you're in the homeless space, or if you're in even domestic violence or victims against crime or getting VOCA funding, those funds have been delayed. So when you're starting to budget and you're thinking about forecasting, how do you, I mean, this almost gets into contingency planning too, right? So talk a little bit about how you would approach that, where if you get a significant portion of your funding from these government funds and they're delayed. I know we even during COVID we had a significant issue with delayed in funding. It's starting to become more of a norm for nonprofits. How do you build in those delays into your funding forecast?
Absolutely. Accountants, we love a probability weighted approach here. A lot of times I would always recommend we look at our revenue. What's the worst case scenario of the timing and the net amount that we'll receive? On the expense side, I would prefer that we assume that we're going to be operating as we always have. So then you can start to look at the costs that are recurring to deliver the programs that we're maintaining, and then also kind of incorporate that risk of the reduced or delayed funding. From there, you do need to work with your fundraising team. The more that this becomes uncertain on the revenue side, the more we do need to press on the fundraising team to assist and close that gap.
Yeah, and I think in this day and age, what we've been doing with several of our organizations where there's been perhaps it's not been realized yet, but we've seen threats of significant elimination of funding streams. We've had them do two budgets. And I know that
Mhm,
may seem overwhelming, but this is what we'd like to do.
mhm,
And this is our lean. If we have to just core down to the things that have the most impact. And I think this goes back to your outcome measures,
mhm,
and this is where you can't do this in separation from your program staff. Sometimes we make fiscal decisions based on the viability of the funding source rather than the impact of the program. And if we
mhm.
say, okay, what is it that we do that makes the biggest impact? And let's try to preserve that core service. And then we would get rid of everything else and really focusing on that if you can, and having one budget that's lean, one budget that's our full budget. What I like to do when I'm looking at revenue gaps is estimate. So you've got your three, let's just say $1 million a year for 3 years, just for round numbers, because I don't do math in my head like Charles does.
No, I don't
So
either.
we, we got a $3 million comprehensive campaign. We know that we're 80% confident that these funding sources will come in. And I know there's some folks that are asking about, like, we don't know about our corporate gifts this year. Certainly with the new tax bill, there are going to be a lot of organizations that are going to be looking at every other year of funding, whereas before they may have been an every year funder. Um, and I think that's, again, lends itself for why you have to have a multi-year budget. But I would say, what's 80% confident? I'd put that in your budget and your revenue. And then you do that estimate the best you can, both a high and a low of here's 80% confidence, and maybe here's 50% confident with our big budget, and here's 80% confident, with the other one. And then we or vice versa. And then we go in and we build that budget out. I think we have to be doing both of those right now. Uh, it's tricky because you also don't want your entire staff to know that you're planning, potential layoffs or reductions or whatever that might be. But having those conversations now is so critically important so that you know what we do, what's really critically important, how much does it actually cost us, and what is that funding gap? And what are those strong outcomes that we're delivering with those programs? Um, yeah, I'm seeing some people that are saying, uh, you know, having trouble finding a CPA. I know that is that has got to be one of the hardest positions to fill, is finding somebody who's a CPA who wants to be that board treasurer or somebody with some financial acumen. But I also would like to recommend that if you can't get them to actually be your board treasurer, find some CPAs that will just volunteer on your board financial committee. They don't have to
Absolutely.
actually have fiduciary responsibility and sit on the board. They can just serve on the committee. And that's a good place to get maybe young CPAs who are busy and they don't have a lot of time, but they're willing to meet once a month for a finance committee meeting. Um, but one of the questions is, what if the finance director is a CPA, financial recommendations are just not being heeded by the board? And we see that a lot where the board just doesn't want to hear it. They're hearing it at their own companies, but when we're talking to them, they there's a miscommunication. Do you have any suggestions for that?
It ties back to my initial point where your finance director needs to be clear and concise in their communication, not just discuss financial fluctuations, but the operating reasons behind them. From there, they need to help the board understand the importance of said fluctuations. Now,
Yeah,
conversely, on the board side, if they're not being receptive, that could be a bigger problem. We may need to consider restacking the board, finding professionals that do understand the importance of these financial results, because at the end of the day, what it comes back to, and I've said it before, if we're not turning a profit, we may not continue. So you do need a board that does have that concern, that does have that drive, and wants to support the nonprofit in that endeavor.
yeah. Earlier we were talking about tech because the two issues that came up over and over again at AFP International was budgeting and financials and having good, solid financials to fundraise with. And the other one was tech. And so someone is actually asking, what program do you use to build a budget and document assumptions and build scenarios? Because you don't have to start from scratch. I mean, I was doing this with Excel spreadsheets, which was probably why I was blurry and developed migraines at some point in time. But talk to us a little bit about, like, how does somebody even get into this? Because this isn't a skill that a lot of accountants even have.
It's a number of different things, and then I will tell you, for the people in the room, a lot of times your ERP system already has a built-in function for this. There's a number that I've seen in the market that have budget analysis tools that kind of dives into your existing financial data and helps you build it if you don't have that expertise. You may laugh, but truthfully, I actually prefer building it in Excel. It gives me the full control over it. It allows me to build the assumptions, and it
Yeah,
allows me to get into the nitty-gritty of it because towards the end, when I need to get management's buy-in, I have everything in front of me. I have every
yeah.
assumption that I've used, and it gives me that granular level detail that I need to communicate the necessity.
Yeah, and Nicole's asking, do we recommend a multi-year budget? I would say, Nicole, if you don't have a multi-year budget moving forward, you're going to be one of the nonprofits that's left behind.
Mhm.
Major donors are going to start requiring that you've had some sort of analysis of what the cost of doing business is moving forward so that you can be sustainable. It is absolutely, I think, probably one of, if not the most critical elements of an organization's sustainability moving forward. And I do want to offer this. If you get into contact with us after this webinar, we do have a really nice budget template that Charles and I developed. It has linking spreadsheets and everything. We're happy to get on a call with you, give you the template, um, and walk you through how to put your numbers into it. And it allows you to do a lot of things like break your programs out, build out that multi-year forecast, and to develop a lot of assumptions. So it's a great budget. It's what I used to use, or it's actually highly adapted from what I used to use when I was a nonprofit CEO. But it will give you, if you don't have something currently, this spreadsheet will give you a really good basis to start from. Um, let's see. So I think thinking about how far out you plan and
Mhm.
in building out that that multi-year budget. Um, Tell me, like, what are some of the elements that I think that you would say maybe the top three things that are most important when you're starting to think about projecting out what needs to be put into that multi-year budget? I mean, there's
Absolutely.
so many elements to it, but what are the things that are most variable that people should be thinking about?
Well, lately, I mean, we've said it, funding. Funding is the most variable right now. We have donors that are not giving as much as they were. We have grants that are drying up, delaying funding, or outright being denied. And then on top of that, the consistently rising costs that we've seen exponentially over the past few years that hasn't risen like this. And I want to say this since the 70s or 80s, we haven't seen this type of trend. So to be mindful of those trends when building a multi-year plan is critical. Now we also understand that history is the best performance, excuse me, history is the best indicator of future performance, but nobody has a crystal ball. So it still comes back to tailoring that model as we progress. But as you're going out to years 2 and 3, there's nothing wrong with keeping it somewhat in line with what you're projecting for the next year. Now,
Mhm.
sure to add your bigger goals as well. To your point, that maybe a capital campaign, maybe an expansion of services. That should be built in there, but we consistently tweak it as we move to ensure that that stays within reality.
So oftentimes what I see when we're working through with organizations and helping them budget is, and I actually plug the book. I actually talk about this in my book, Nonprofit Inc., but is this number fear
Hmm.
of we put a number out there and it's a real number. We ask the accounting team, give us this number, that it's a real number. Either the board has a sticker shock or the staff have sticker shock, and we're like, okay, that's not real. That's not real. And I think we do this sometimes. Somebody mentioned earlier around um, events. Special events, they are a necessary evil in the nonprofit world. However, I just had this conversation with a client the other day that they lost money on their event. And they said, no, we made $7,000. And I said, no, when you use staff time, technology, admin overhead, the other things that you had to put into that event, you lost $15,000. And it's okay to lose money on an event if you have a very clear financial goal, such as you're bringing high net donors in. It's a cultivation event, it's an appreciation event, something like that. But if you're using events to drive annual fund revenue, which is always a bad idea in my opinion, you have to really make sure that you're calculating what something actually costs. And we're also seeing wild numbers with capital projects where the estimated costs are, and it's not the fault of the nonprofit. It's just
It just costs
the
them.
environment, the external environment has changed dramatically. So um how do you account for that? And those sorts of the sticker shock, first of all.
Mhm.
How do you deal with the sticker shock, both the internal staff where the fighting against that resistance of wanting to just play with the numbers so that they're more palatable and you don't have such a high fundraising number.
It's, it comes down to it's a lot of hand holding, it's a lot of conversations, it's a lot of explanations. It's making sure the stakeholders involved their expectations are tempered, and our information that we provide to them is backed up with real data. A nonprofit cannot live in a hypothetical world just like a for-profit cannot. When we're having budget conversations on the for-profit side, it's very black and white. It's very, this is what's going to happen if we do A, this is what's going to happen if we do B. The information is backed up by bidding, competitive quotes, different information to make sure that those dollars match. And that information is brought to the table when having these conversations. That's the piece that I would love to see nonprofits exercise a little bit more, because we need to be honest and transparent when we're building budgets. We can't live in a hypothetical world that'll only come back to bite us later.
Well, and that's one thing that I like about the template that, and if you email us, we'll send it to you. But the template actually lays out how the expenses, and you can put in the grant that you have to cover those expenses, and then you know exactly what you still have to fundraise for. We always used to joke that we would write grants in kind of blindly, and we'd end up funding our copy machine 5 times over, and we had way too much budget for the copy machine and not enough for paper. As a wild example, but this allows you to really look at, again, great program, great service, but the funder's not going to pay 100% of the expense. So what is the expense we still have to fundraise for? So that your fundraising team then has a very, very clear idea, as well as your grant writers, on what they have to fund. And I know that when I talk to fundraisers and grant writers, their
Mhm.
biggest frustration when they contract and work with a nonprofit is that they're not giving them detailed budget numbers. And I think if you don't have those detailed budget numbers and you hire a grant writing firm, for instance, you are wasting your money because they don't know what to put in those grant budgets. And what they'll do is they'll put things in there that you don't really need. And then you end up with restricted funding that isn't helping you move your organization forward. So it's really, it can cause you to actually lose money in the way that you're trying to raise money if you're not really being very strategic about what it is you have to fund and what that gap is and where that gap is. Um, with rising costs, we're seeing nonprofits shift their focus to right sizing their operation budgets. What are some budget pitfalls to watch for when right sizing? I mentioned already making sure you're not cutting the programs that actually have the impact for the programs that get funded that don't have impact. But what are some other pitfalls when you're starting to right size or you're looking at those contingency plans?
Absolutely. Again, make sure you're focused on your administrative and general costs as well. Program costs absolutely drive our outcomes, but we need to make sure that we're considering the people that are supervising the people driving those outcomes. We need to consider, as simple as it is, the cost of our buildings, the cost of our supplies. When you're keeping that out of the equation, you're working blind here.
Yeah. So one other question here, and then if anybody has any other questions, please let us know. Do you think nonprofits should update the actual budget when there is a change versus including just notes in your financial reports? So, if there's a significant change, I don't know how you don't update your budget, but what about budget amendments versus just
Absolutely.
noting it?
I agree with you. It's one of those things, if it's something small and it's an anomaly, no. But if we're talking about major changes to circumstances, I highly recommend a revised budget, because otherwise, a note I don't think is going to drive the urgency associated with the circumstance, whereas an updated budget would.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think looking at that at least at the 6 month mark is always a good idea because again, your budget is a tool. It's a strategic tool you should be using to be able to drive the decisions that you're making, the board's confidence in where we are and what we're doing. And if you're not driving that with an accurate budget and being able to say year to date budget, how from somebody who's not a finance person, because I'm my background's in trauma therapy, talk to us a minute about how does that affect your financials in your accounting system?
I'm sorry, were you asking me or were you asking somebody in the room? My
No, I'm asking
apologies.
you. How does that affect your budget and your finance?
Carol, I'm so sorry it cut out again. Could you just repeat your
I
question?
apologize. I started coughing. How does that affect the software and the budget if you adjust your budget during the year?
Mhm. Oh, how does it impact the software and your budget? Okay. So most softwares can very much incorporate that. That's not usually a problem, and it's something I highly recommend. As somebody who sat on boards as a CPA myself, one of the biggest things I look for, and it's also a red flag to me, if I don't see an adequately maintained budget, and by that I mean making adjustments when you need to and analyzing it appropriately, that's a concern to me. Am I going to donate to the organization? Is this a board that I want to continue to sit on? But fortunately, what I've seen over my career is most of your systems can adapt to that. It's just, does the organization have the people in place and the concern necessary to do so?
Um, so if I'm a nonprofit person and I'm on this webinar, what's the first thing I should do just from taking all this information?
First thing you should do, absolutely, is if you don't have a budget, build one. And then secondly, give Carol and I a call on that. But regarding that, it's really start to digest what makes your organization tick, down to every penny. You should understand which programs are impacted the most by high costs, which ones are incurring lower costs, if that happens, and start to meet with departmental representatives to really understand the numbers that you're seeing. From there, when you have an understanding on the operations, building a budget becomes a whole lot easier. It's not as intimidating when you know how the business itself functions.
That's great. And I'm if anybody has any questions, it says if a nonprofit is yet to hire an accountant or finance director, and no one is willing to do that on the board, kind of that transition, what guidance do you have about what's when it's right to hire versus outsource a bookkeeping firm? And that I think this is really, really an important question because I know as we've had um, growth in our organization, we've had amazing, amazing bookkeepers, but then we needed an accountant. And then at some point we needed a CFO. And so talk to me a little bit about when do you think organizations need to start thinking about making those transitions? What's the pain point that happens? And maybe the right way to go about that.
Absolutely. And over my career, I've worked a lot of stellar bookkeepers. I very much I can't do my job without great bookkeepers. But as the organization grows, but beyond maybe a few people, maybe one service, that's when you really need to start upgrading your accounting staff and your finance staff because you do need somebody that knows how to dig into that information and provide that detailed analysis and also understand the workings of the accounting that's impacting those financials. And that tends to come again with your controller, with your director of finance, with somebody who's a little bit more seasoned on dealing with the high level technical. And it's not necessarily a dollar number. I usually attribute it more to operationally. How many programs do we have? How many transactions do we have? It becomes more of a volume and operational consideration than it does a dollar value consideration.
That's a really good point. I think the same goes for a lot of folks want to know when should I hire a grant writer versus contract. And it has to do with the complexity and the number of grants.
Mhm.
At some point, you need somebody to be on site to develop and maintain those relationships and do all the accounting and the reporting and data management, as opposed to somebody who's just writing your grants for you. So it is really kind of a volume perspective rather than a dollar perspective. Um, and for those that maybe have an accounting firm, what is the value of a CFO? I mean, because CFOs for me, when I finally got to that point, I was like, I don't know that I need this person, but I knew that there were questions that weren't being answered. So how do I know that I needed a CFO? And what's the difference between somebody who has that designation and that training, as opposed to just say a senior accountant?
Absolutely. To your point, you as a CEO, I always look at CEO versus CFO as two roles that support each other in different ways. The CEO is more the mayor of the organization. You're there to attract interest. You're there to attract donors. You're there to make sure everybody knows what the organization is doing and all of the good things that it's doing. The CFO is meant to truly focus very, very intensely on the forward version of the financial statements. How do we make sure that we don't bottom out with our grants? How do we make sure our costs are minimized? When you partner a CFO with a strong controller, you have the historical financial information analyzed properly, and then you have a CFO that knows how to strategically act upon that to keep the organization funding and keep it profitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think this is something that is one of the reasons that you're on our team here at Charity. I mean, we've got an amazing team. We've got people who've been in the nonprofit field for decades, even longer than that, if you look at me. And we have a lot of different experiences and talents, everything from business planning to alternative revenue streams. If you need to spin off that LLC, budgeting, outcome measurement, research. We really help you build those elements that you need to be really attractive to a major donor, to be sustainable, to have the infrastructure, and to be able to build that cadence. So if someone were to call you, which obviously we would love to have them reach out to you, we've offered for folks to be able to do, and we'll put the QR code up again before we leave. The quick financial survey. It takes, I think, like 3 or 4 minutes. We'll give you an assessment on what those next steps should be. So it'll be customized. It'll really help you kind of understand where you are and where you need to go. But to talk about, for so many of these organizations, some of them are a lot more sophisticated than others, which is great. That's just part of the growth process. What are the sort of the value adds that you could help them with?
Absolutely. I mean, again, this topic was about budgeting, but with my experience, there's an array of things I truly love to help nonprofits with. Financial accounting cleanup. If you need a controller but can't afford a full-time one, if you need bookkeeping, if you need assistance getting through your audit, preparation and review of your annual 990. I really truly love to take my for-profit and audit experience and bring that to a nonprofit in any way. So when it comes to the financial side of it, there's a number of things I can do to help. Truly, from a drive to just want to see these organizations continue to do the wonderful things that they do.
Yeah, yeah. Somebody asked if they could have a consult with Leo Wick, our chief canine officer. He's very expensive. But yes, absolutely. We will fly. Leo Wick actually happens to be our in-house canine friend. He's a licensed therapy dog. So he does great office visits. If anyone wants to have an office visit, have to be in the Central Florida area, I can do that. Um, I would like to also add, as you mentioned, Charles, we do fractional work. So a lot of times nonprofits are trying to scale, or they have a vacancy.
Mhm.
And I've got a lot of organizations right now that have a vacancy in the development department. It's really hurting their revenue stream because they don't have somebody in there filling that role. We can come in at a limited basis and help you with whatever gap you have because our team is very diverse. We have operations experts, we have financial, we database. We can help you clean up your donor database and optimize your tech stack, but help you get through that rough spot and get to the next place and help you actually find the right person for your team. And our goal and our love of all of this is to help you build the infrastructure you need so that you don't need us. We actually celebrate and ring the bell when you don't need us anymore because our clients, on average, once they put the systems in place and they get all of these elements in place, they average 200% increase in fundraising within 18 to 24 months. And I don't say that lightly. We actually have the data to back it up. Um, Building the plan, building the budget. Donors just respond differently. Board members respond differently when you have all of those elements in place. So we'd love to be able to talk to you about that, to be able to give you that budget template. If you just email us at hello@charityglobal.com, we'd be happy to send that over to you. Take the assessment. You'll be able to reach out. And I think they're going to put in here the ability to contact you, Peter. Any last recommendations? I know, being the financial person kind of feels like being on an island sometimes in a nonprofit. The two toughest things I think are technology and finance in
Mhm.
nonprofits because we're really, really good at helping people. and making things better. But sometimes those are the two pieces that we struggle with the most. So, um, you know, some last words of advice for those people who are in that financial position, who are really feeling like they're, running uphill with a giant rock. What's some advice that you have for them?
My biggest point, I love it, coming from the accounting and finance world. We're usually the bad guy. We're usually the one delivering bad news. But my piece of advice here to take the information that we give and work with it, because the thing is, most financial professionals in this sector, especially nonprofit, the only reason we're delivering this information is because we want to help. And I can speak for myself and a number of others in this community that when we're delivering this information, we're merely delivering it to help and see the organization grow beyond what anybody had originally contemplated. It's meant to
Yeah.
support and see better outcomes going down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. And I to those of you that are doing the finance work, please, hang in there. I'd say the one of the hardest positions to fill is a really good nonprofit accountant.
Mm.
Those the nonprofit finance people are the heart and blood of any nonprofit. So thank you all for what you do. I just a couple last minute things. Feel free to please, I think they've got our LinkedIn, connect with us on LinkedIn. If you'd like the budget template, I know some of you are putting budget template in the chat, but please email us because we won't have the ability to connect with you um, in the chat. So shoot us a note, email to hello@charityglobal.com, and we'll be more than happy to send you the budget template. Take the shoot the little QR code. Maybe Peter can put that back up on the slide there, and we can have you all take that if you haven't taken it already. And it's our 10-year anniversary next month. So if you're interested, you can go on our website too, learn more about the Nonprofit Inc. book that I've got coming out, which is literally this operating system. And there's a huge section on budget and with all the templates and tools, as well as the board team donors and how to build your own business plan. So please, I'm happy to have you here. Like I said, tomorrow is May. We're celebrating 10 years at Charity, globally working around with the many countries with lots of hundreds and hundreds of nonprofits. And we hope that this has been helpful to you today. Charles, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having
And
me.
if you do have
It's been a
any
pleasure.
thought, thank you so much for folks that are saying happy anniversary. Appreciate that. Please feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you may have. And we hope that the rest of your day and the rest of your week are wonderful.
Thank you all.